Hello, my most amazing artists. Today we are going to begin a sculpture project of the human figure. That is to say, a human-like body. You get to paint and decorate this sculpture any way you'd like to be a realistic human being or a rainbow painter like me. I'm really excited to see what you come up with. The first thing you'll need to do is to build an armature. An armature is the inner part of a sculpture that supports the sculpture and helps it stand, but also helps it take shape. Depending on the sculpture that you're making, your armature might be made out of many different things, but today we're using tinfoil. So you will need a rectangle of tinfoil like this, standing up tall vertically, up and down. And at the top of your paper, draw two lines that are equally distanced apart. They should go down about a third of the way down the length of the tinfoil. Then draw yourself a line down in the bottom middle of the tinfoil, the same length as the top two. This space right up here where I'm drawing the smiley face is eventually going to be the head of our human figure. But first, we need to grab up some scissors and cut on those three lines that we drew. After you cut on the lines, you can actually already start to see a human figure. You can see a head and two arms at the top, and then two chunky legs at the bottom. What we need to do is scrunch and squish the tinfoil to shape it into more of a humanly shape rather than so rectangular. So what you'll need to do is grab your tinfoil guy around the waist and squeeze. It's going to be kind of scary at first, but trust me, it'll all work out. You should see after you scrunch the waist or torso of your boxy guy that there should be two legs at the bottom and three flaps at the top, two for each arm and then one for the head. So begin crunching and smooshing the tinfoil into leg shapes at the bottom, two arm shapes at the top, and a round or oval head at the very top with a neck. Make sure to give your figure some TLC around the joints, like the elbows and the knees, by squishing just a little bit harder to form it into the most human-like figure you can. And once that is done, for now, you are done, and you're going to want to write your name on a sculpture base. This is what your little guy is going to be glued onto. And we will place our figure onto the base with our name on it until next time. Now it is time to wrap our armature with something that is called bandage plaster. It's what doctors in the olden times used to wrap broken arms with and make casts out of. And it's really cool stuff to use for sculpture. It comes in these long strips of fabric that are coated in plaster of Paris. And what we need to do first to prepare while the plaster is all nice and dry and our tables are clean is spend a little bit of time cutting up this plaster into many different sizes so that we can wrap our tiny little human figure with the pieces. You probably notice immediately that it is super dusty, this bandage plaster stuff. So after you're done cutting, please make sure that you brush any extra dust back into the container that is holding your bandage plaster and put away the scissors for now. You're not going to need them. All you'll need is a bowl of warm water to activate this bandage plaster. Before you start with that though, make sure you give a lot of thought to the pose of your human figure. What is your human figure doing? What kind of human are they? Are they a human at all? What are they doing? Take a moment to pose your aluminum foil figure into your final decision pose for this sculpture. I am creating a little rainbow alien painter, and so it needs to be standing just about like this to hold a paint palette and a paint brush. And then once your figure is posed just how you want it, grab up a piece of that bandage plaster and dunk it into the water. Next, try your very best to keep the plaster flat like a ribbon. as you wrap the entire body of the armature with the plaster. You'll see that once the plaster gets wet, it wants to roll up on itself, kind of like a rope, and we are not going for that. We need to wrap this plaster nice and flat, like a ribbon winding around the figure, so that it's easier to paint because it will be smoother. Speaking of smoothness, after you've put on each piece of bandage plaster, take a moment to rub the surface to smooth out the plaster as much as you can. Remember, the smoother it is, the easier it is to paint. Another thing that you want to watch out for is how the plaster drapes across the limbs of your figure. So make sure that you are not crossing around both legs at the same time with the plaster, because what you see is what you get. If I leave that piece of plaster in between his legs, then it kind of looks like he's wearing a little skirt, and that's not exactly what I was going for. So watch out for that if you're not going for a skirt look. Make sure that the plaster does not cross over both legs. Remember, what you see is what you get. However this plaster is looking while it's wet is just about the shape it's going to have when it's dry. But the cool thing about plaster is that you can form it and kind of mush it into the shape you want, just like clay. So I'm kind of reshaping this other leg here to match the other one, and I'm just squishing it just like I would clay to get the right shape that I want. And here I go, speeding things up, just dunking and covering and smoothing this figure and making sure to watch out for the draping of the plaster so that the figure really maintains its shape with 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, a head, and a neck. And I'm also making sure that every time I lay down a fresh piece of plaster, I'm taking a moment to rub it smooth, because I know that the smoother the plaster, the easier it is to paint. And on top of that, I'm trying my very best to make sure that this plaster stays in a flat ribbon and does not roll up on itself like a rope. Again, this is to make it smoother and to make sure that it's easy to paint. I'm also going to ensure that I cover up every last bit of that tinfoil. No tinfoil showing whatsoever. After you're done covering your armature with plaster, you can make props or hair or clothing for your figure out of plaster. I had said before that plaster, when it gets wet, if you form it gently, it works a lot like clay. So I'm going to use a bit of plaster, I'm going to dunk it and fold it on itself and try to form it into an oval shape for my paint palette. If you are making hair or clothing for your figure with the plaster, you can attach it right to the figure right now. But if you're making props for this figure to hold onto, like a paint palette and a paintbrush or something of that nature, you're going to want to make those pieces separately. Let them dry out completely, paint them separately, and glue them where they need to go at the very end. You don't have to do that with hair or clothes, but any props that your figure is going to be holding needs to be made and painted completely separately, and we'll glue it together all at the end. Here I am twisting together a bit of plaster in order to make the handle and brush of a paintbrush. And I'm going to set this and the little paint palette on my base with my name on it so that they can dry nicely. And I'm also going to place my figure on top of the board as well, so it can have time to dry so that we can paint it next. Now, you might have noticed something about plaster, that it's very, very messy, and I know that. The one thing that I want you to do for me today is keep the plaster out of the sinks. Do not dump your bowl of plastery water down the drain. It's going to clog it, and that would be no good. And please listen to Mrs. Toth's My Cleanup Instructions today, as it is very important for your success in this project. Once your figure and any props and parts and pieces that you made out of plaster are dry, it's time to paint your figure. We're going to be using acrylic paint, the No Joke paint, in order to cover this sculpture beautifully with bright, vibrant colors. And you can paint your sculpture any way you want. You can try to mix a skin tone and paint this like a real human being. You could paint it as a character. You could paint it as you. You could also just go crazy with colors like me and make a rainbow alien. Whatever you decide to do, make sure that you cover all of the white spaces of the plaster. We don't want to see any of that accidentally coming through, because then your sculpture won't look finished. That's all I ask. Cover all the plaster. And as always, I am so into when you guys add your own little flavor to these art projects. So if you want to bust out some glitter, if you want to grab some pom-poms to work with, whatever you want to add to the sculpture to make it amazingly yours, please do it. Once your paint job is completely dry, it's time to put the sculpture all together. We're going to use hot glue to do this, and we're going to turn over our board to the other side, the blank side that doesn't have our name on it. That's the side we're going to use to glue on our sculpture. Of course, I'd like to say you always have the option of decorating or painting the base of the sculpture as well. I've decided to leave mine clean, natural wood. And I'm going to put some hot glue on this little figure's feet and stand him upright. And I'm going to be careful with the hot glue gun. I'm not going to touch the nose of the glue gun, and I'm not going to touch the glue itself, because both are very hot. So please be careful with the hot glue. And also make sure to give your sculpture some grab time. See how I held down my sculpture for quite a few seconds there to make sure it would stick? You should do the same thing. I am really, really excited to see these sculptures come to life. I'm pumped to see what you decide to do and the creative decisions you decide to make. See you later.